If all your beliefs were nothing more than the stale echoes of the crowd, what would remain of you? If your convictions, your laughter, your hopes, your very identity were nothing but the froth upon the waves of a blind ocean of instinct, then tell me, what remains when that froth dissolves? The soul, stripped of illusion, stands naked before the abyss, trembling not from the cold, but from the sudden recognition that it was never a soul at all, only a flicker of the will to live, chained to striving, condemned to thirst. You imagine yourself free, yet your very longing testifies against you. The lover cries for union, the merchant cries for gain, the saint cries for salvation. Different cries, one master. The will does not ask, it compels. The human being is not the sovereign of his inner life, but a marionette, jerking to the pulls of a force without reason, without aim, without mercy. And so, every smile is tethered to a shadow, every success the herald of another demand, every beginning already in seed. If one looks carefully into the human swarm, one is struck not by its variety, but by its monotony. Each individual imagines himself unique, yet each wears the same invisible chains, walks the same circular path, and repeats the same tired phrases of the age. The herd mind governs silently, more tyrannical than any monarch, for it requires no sword to enforce its rule, only ridicule, only the fear of exclusion. Man is a herd animal who would rather perish than think alone. Observe how public opinion is manufactured. The newspapers thunder with the latest moral outrage, and suddenly thousands who yesterday were indifferent now rage with identical fury. They have not thought, they have echoed. Their indignation is borrowed, their certainty is rented. One speaks, the others repeat, and soon the hollow cry of the crowd is mistaken for wisdom. What man calls consensus is rarely truth, it is only conformity dressed in solemn robes. But the herd is not only intellectual, it is also emotional. Desires spread contagiously. One man buys a trinket, and suddenly thousands hunger for the same. One man praises a work of art, and suddenly it is a masterpiece, though no one knows why. Desire multiplies not through reason, but through imitation. The will, which already tyrannizes from within, now redoubles its force through the voices of others, until the individual is swept away in a tide of cravings that are not even his own. Consider fashion. What is it but the most absurd testament to the herd's power? A garment once ridiculed suddenly becomes indispensable. A color once scorned suddenly becomes desirable, and all believe they choose freely. They do not see the strings. They are like children playing in sand, convinced their castles are grand monuments, while the sea waits patiently to wash them away. The illusion of progress is the crowning deception. Each generation congratulates itself for surpassing the ignorance of its fathers, yet the same primal cries resound across millennia: hunger, lust, ambition, fear. The Roman plebeian shouting for bread in circuses is brother to the modern citizen refreshing his glowing screen in search of diversion. Machines grow faster, weapons more efficient, luxuries more extravagant, but the heart remains the same furnace of longing, and the world remains the same theater of disappointment. Happiness is dangled before us like a carrot, before a starving mule. Society whispers, study harder, work longer, obey, strive, and in time you shall be rewarded. Yet, when the promised day arrives, what greets the obedient soul? A new demand, a higher rung to climb, a fresh hunger gnawing at the bowels. Progress is not a ladder, it is a treadmill where the runner sweats and strains only to remain in place until he collapses. Nowhere is the deception more tragic than in love. Two souls, inflamed by desire, believe they have discovered paradise in each other's arms. Yet beneath this rapture lies the cold calculation of the species. Love is the mask by which the will ensures reproduction. It whispers of eternal happiness, but it seeks only the continuation of life, indifferent to the suffering it creates. How many are ruined by this illusion, families shattered, individuals driven to despair, while the blind species marches on, satisfied only that the cycle repeats. The same mechanism haunts ambition. The scholar imagines immortality through books, the general through conquest, the merchant through gold. Each believes he carves his own destiny, yet all are slaves to the will's restless hunger. And even when their desires are granted, dissatisfaction returns swiftly. The conqueror, standing over the ashes of cities, feels emptiness gnaw at him. The wealthy man, counting his coins, finds their weight grows heavier with every passing year. The famous man, adored by the crowd, discovers that fame itself is but a prison. binding him to the whims of strangers. And then, as if to crown the absurdity, death arrives. All striving ceases not because it is fulfilled, but because the body can no longer sustain the torment. The same worms feast on the flesh of kings and beggars alike, and the monuments of glory crumble as surely as the hovels of the poor. Tell me then, what is the meaning of this ceaseless labor if its end is dust? Here, in this endless cycle of imitation, striving, disappointment, and decay, one glimpses the essence of the human condition. Man is not a rational being, nor even an individual being. He is a wave in the ocean of will, driven by currents he neither understands nor controls, believing himself sovereign while carried helplessly to the rocks. The true essence of the world is not thought, not spirit, not reason. It is will. Not the noble will of philosophers who speak of choice, freedom, or self-determination. No, those are polite masks, comforting illusions for fragile minds. The will that reigns at the core of existence is blind, insatiable, and without purpose. It is the ceaseless striving to exist, the endless hunger that animates stone, plant, animal, and man alike. Reason is but a fragile lantern flickering in the storm of this will. It sheds a little light here and there, but the storm remains sovereign. What you call your rational life is merely the rationalization of irrational impulses. Your intellect is not master, but servant and obedient clerk, endlessly devising means to fulfill desires it never chose. The mind is the will's secretary, recording its whims and executing its commands. What then is life itself? A restless oscillation between want and boredom. When desire is unfulfilled, suffering gnaws. When it is fulfilled, satisfaction vanishes swiftly, leaving a void. This void is boredom, the emptiness of the will deprived of an object. Thus the pendulum of existence swings ceaselessly, from pain to boredom, with only fleeting moments of pleasure, like sparks from flint that vanish as soon as they appear. Consider hunger. The pangs of the empty stomach torment the animal, driving it into desperate exertion. At last, the prey is captured, the meal devoured. Relief comes, but it is brief. Soon hunger returns, just as sharp, just as merciless. All existence is this hunger in endless repetition. The pleasure of eating is not positive. It is merely the temporary cessation of pain. The same applies to every so-called joy. Sexual ecstasy, the most intense of all, is likewise followed by emptiness, disgust, or renewed craving. It is not joy, but the momentary silencing of torment, a trick of nature to perpetuate the species. Pleasure is never a gain. It is only the fleeting cancellation of suffering. Suffering is positive, pleasure negative, yet men chase the negative as if it were a treasure, while the positive, suffering, waits patiently to reclaim its throne. The will's cruelty lies in its ceaselessness. It never rests. The child, once sated with toys, desires new ones. The adult, once established in a career, desires status. The old man, fearing death, desires immortality or remembrance. Desire never dies until life itself dies, and even then it continues through offspring, through the species, through the inexorable march of existence. Look at nature. Each being lives by devouring another. The plant draws its nourishment from soil and sun, yet it too competes, choking its neighbors for light. The insect devours the plant. The bird devours the insect. The predator devours the bird. And in the end, worms devour the predator. Life is a chain of devourings, each link sustained by the torment of another. What name shall we give this but a vast cannibalism, a cosmic slaughterhouse in which every creature is both executioner and victim? And yet, within this inferno, man dares to speak of progress, of civilization, of happiness. What childish arrogance! Progress is merely the will arming itself with sharper claws. Civilization refines cruelty, dresses barbarism in silk and etiquette. Happiness remains the mirage glimpsed in the desert, always ahead, never attained. The human mind, in its arrogance, imagines itself apart from this. We are rational, man declares. Yet what is reason but the will grown cunning? The animal hunts with tooth and claw. Man hunts with weapons, machines, and schemes. The essence is unchanged. Striving, struggling, hungering. The mind only multiplies the means by which the will torments itself. For every convenience invented, a new dependency is created. For every luxury acquired, a new anxiety arises. The slave builds his own chains and calls it progress. Consider ambition. Why does the general march his soldiers into slaughter? Why does the statesman sacrifice thousands for territory or honor? Because the will has infected him with the hunger for power. He does not ask why. He only obeys the silent compulsion. And once the territory is conquered, the hunger remains. One province leads to another, one war to another. There is no end, for the will knows no end. The same compulsion drives the lover. He is intoxicated, restless, mad with longing. He imagines he seeks happiness, but the truth is that the will seeks only reproduction. He is its puppet, dancing on strings woven by instincts older than reason itself. He swears eternal devotion, yet once the species is satisfied, once children are born, passion fades, irritation and indifference set in. The will has had its way and discards its tools. How many tragedies, how many ruined lives are born of this deception? Yet still the world worships love as if it were divine. The philosopher may imagine himself detached, but even philosophy is the will in disguise. The hunger for knowledge is still hunger. The desire to see through the veil of Maya still desire. One studies, writes, argues, not because reason demands it, but because the will torments the intellect into activity. Even the ascetic who denies life is driven by the will, though in a rare paradox, he is driven to deny the will itself. Only here does the will seem to turn against itself, as if, weary of its own torment, it sought to extinguish its flame. History, too, reveals the will's endless cycle. One empire rises, striving for dominion. It reaches its zenith, bloated with wealth, only to collapse under its own weight. Another takes its place. Rome falls, Byzantium falls, the Ottomans rise. Each believes itself eternal, each vanishes. The will cares nothing for their dreams of permanence. It builds only to destroy, destroys only to build again. This is why history repeats, not because men forget, but because the will never ceases. In the life of the individual, the pattern is the same. Youth is tormented by longing for love, adventure, achievement. Middle age is tormented by ambition, wealth, social standing. Old age is tormented by fear of death, regret, the crumbling of the body. At every stage, suffering reigns. Childhood has its fears, youth its anxieties, adulthood its labors, old age its decay. Life is a journey from suffering to suffering, ending in annihilation. And yet, at every stage, man clings desperately to life, as if more torment were a blessing. Ask yourself, what does it mean to exist? It means to strive, to hunger, to chase phantoms. It means to be enslaved by a force that does not ask your consent and does not care for your peace. It means to be thrown into a world without reason, to be tormented by desires you did not choose, to struggle vainly for satisfaction that never lasts, and to be extinguished at last, as though you had never been. The will is the demon behind the mask of existence. It whispers in your flesh, it trembles in your veins, it moves in your breath. You call it life, you call it self, but it is neither. It is the one force, the one essence, the one curse, endlessly reproducing itself in 1,000 forms, endlessly devouring itself, endlessly condemning itself to begin again. And so we arrive at the dreadful truth. To exist is to suffer, because to exist is to will, and the will cannot be silenced by satisfaction, by reason, by hope. It can only be silenced by negation, by its own exhaustion, by its own self-denial, by the renunciation that comes when one finally turns away from striving altogether. But of this we shall speak later. For now, behold the will in its nakedness, the ceaseless tyrant, the blind puppeteer, the inexhaustible tormentor, the true essence of all things. The cruelty of the will is not limited to mankind. It stretches into every corner of nature. Look at the forest, tranquil to the eye, yet beneath its canopy rages silent war. Each tree thrusts upward, starving its neighbor of light. Roots intertwine not in harmony, but in strangulation. The stronger tree survives, the weaker withers. Even the flower, delicate and innocent to our sentimentality, spreads poison in the soil to suffocate rivals. Life does not coexist, it competes. Among animals, the violence is naked. The predator crouches in hunger, the prey trembles in terror. Each moment of life is a preparation for death. Each act of feeding the destruction of another. The lamb grazing in peace is already the wolf's meal in embryo. The bird feeding its chicks has stolen worms from the earth, tearing them alive to stuff into the gaping beaks of its offspring. Devouring, everywhere, torment. And man, the so-called pinnacle, refines this slaughter into industry, raising creatures only to torture them efficiently before the knife. In human psychology, the will assumes subtler masks, but remains as relentless. Envy corrodes the heart even in abundance, for desire is not measured by need, but by comparison. A man content with bread becomes miserable upon seeing another with cake. The will torments not only through deprivation, but through the perpetual reminder that others seem to possess more. Vanity, too, is nothing but the hunger to see oneself mirrored in the eyes of others. The applause of strangers intoxicates more than wine, yet it leaves the soul thirstier than before. And ambition is the same hunger in grander disguise. One seeks titles, positions, triumphs, not for their substance, but for the reflected glory of recognition. All of it shadow chasing. In society, the will reveals itself as collective frenzy. Politics is its theater, religion its disguise, economics its mechanism. The politician does not seek truth but power. The priest does not seek eternity but influence. The merchant does not seek wealth but endless accumulation. The crowd cheers for each of them in turn, believing itself free, while in truth, it is only carried by the tide of the same blind striving. The slogans change, the idols rotate, yet the essence remains: hunger, fear, ambition. Metaphysically, one must understand that the will is not within things but behind them. It is the inner kernel of existence, the force of which the world is the mere appearance. What we perceive, bodies, movements, events, are but the manifestations of this hidden will. The stone falls, the seed germinates, the animal seeks food, the man pursues pleasure. All are variations of one and the same primal energy. And because this will has no ultimate aim, no rational end, the world itself is without justification, without reason, without meaning. Existence is not a story, but a torment prolonged. Thus, when we strip away illusions, we see the stark truth. The universe is not guided by benevolence, nor by rational order, nor by any moral law. It is guided by will, a blind, endless hunger, driving all beings into striving, into conflict, into inevitable suffering. Now, let us witness the will in its masks, how it has shaped the drama of human history, how it breathes in the structures of society, how it gnaws at the heart of culture. Look first to the marketplace. Here, the will displays itself with grotesque clarity. The consumer rushes among stalls, shops, or glowing screens, restless as a starving animal. He buys one object only to discard it for another. His house fills with possessions, yet his heart remains hollow. What is consumerism but the industrialization of desire? Factories churn not to meet human need, but to fuel human hunger. The product is obsolete the moment it is purchased, for the will desires not satisfaction, but endless pursuit. The economy thrives not on contentment, but on dissatisfaction. Without boredom, markets would collapse. Politics offers another spectacle. Consider the history of revolutions. The people rise against their oppressors, proclaiming liberty and justice. For a moment, it seems as if something new is born. But soon, the revolution devours itself. The new leaders, once idealists, become tyrants. The new system, once promising freedom, breeds new chains. The French Revolution toppled kings only to crown an emperor. The Russian Revolution shattered aristocracy only to enthrone a despot. Why? Because the will does not change. It only shifts its masks. Hunger for power is eternal, and each revolution is but another feast for the same blind tyrant. Religion, too, reflects the will. Man, terrified by suffering, invents gods to give meaning to his torment. He dreams of paradise where striving ceases, of hell where punishment justifies pain. But these myths are not answers. They are narcotics, numbing the soul against the raw truth of existence. The will itself disguises its cruelty by offering consolation through faith, promising peace beyond the grave, while ensuring struggle continues in this life. Every creed, no matter how noble, serves the same function: to clothe despair in garments of hope. Even art, which I shall later praise as a path of liberation, is not free from the will's grasp. The artist, tormented by visions, compelled to create, finds no rest until the work is born. Yet once finished, dissatisfaction returns, and another work demands expression. The audience, too, consumes art as they consume goods: one symphony, one novel, one painting, then boredom, then the demand for more. Even beauty, which alone can silence the will for moments, is turned into another commodity by the marketplace. History itself, that grand illusion of progress, is nothing more than the will writ large. Wars erupt not because of lofty ideals, but because of the same primal hungers: land, resources, dominance. The Peloponnesian War, the Crusades, the World Wars, different costumes, identical impulses. The same blind striving repeats itself, generation after generation, drenching the earth with blood, while philosophers and poets pretend that mankind learns. Yet mankind learns nothing, because the will forgets nothing and demands always the same. The will, though hidden in its essence, always betrays itself in the stage play of human affairs. To speak of history without reference to the will is like speaking of the ocean while ignoring the tides. Let us walk, then, through the corridors of time and see how the same force manifests in different masks. Consider the Roman Empire. What was its grandeur but the will's hunger for expansion? The legions marched endlessly, not because Rome was secure, but because Rome could never be secure. Each new province demanded another. Each victory inflamed further desire. The amphitheaters echoed with cheers as men slaughtered one another for spectacle. And when Rome, bloated with wealth and decadence, began to rot from within, the barbarians pressed at its borders, not as enemies of civilization, but as fresh instruments of the same blind striving. Rome fell, but the will remained, moving its energies into Byzantium, into Islam, into medieval Christendom. The stage changed, but the play remained. The Middle Ages clothed the will in religious garment. Faith promised salvation, but beneath every cathedral was the same old striving. The Crusades, wrapped in the language of holiness, were in truth the will's hunger for land, wealth, and domination. Pilgrims believed they served God, yet they served only the will, which used their blood to redraw the map of power. Even monasticism, that refuge of ascetics, was not free. Monasteries grew wealthy, orders competed for influence, abbots lived as princes. The will crept even into cloisters, corrupting prayers into politics. The Renaissance flattered the human intellect, but once again it was the will disguising itself in art and science. Artists painted Madonnas, sculptors raised David, scientists charted the heavens, but each was tormented by inner compulsion, driven to create, never satisfied. The age of discovery sailed across oceans, not from noble curiosity, but from hunger for spices, gold, slaves. Columbus, Vasco da Gama, Magellan pawns of the same will, cloaked in banners of glory, leaving trails of corpses behind. The Industrial Revolution was the will's most grotesque invention. Factories rose, like temples, to insatiable striving. Men, women, children, chained to machines, sacrificed their bodies to the altar of production. Cities swelled with laborers, coughing, starving, dreaming of prosperity, yet finding only endless toil. The capitalist amassed wealth, the worker chased survival, yet both were bound to the same treadmill. Machines promised liberation, but delivered new chains. And today, the digital age repeats the same. Glowing screens command more attention, more labor, more desire. The slave is not chained to a wheel, but to a device. His eyes devoured, his attention monetized. Look to war in the modern era. The First World War was hailed as the war to end all wars, yet it birthed another, greater war. Why? Because the will cannot be ended. It seeks only conflict, only striving. The 20th century drowned in blood because technology armed the will with unprecedented tools, but did not change its essence. Tanks, planes, bombs merely sharper claws for the same beast. And even after Hiroshima, mankind still forges weapons of annihilation, driven by the same blind hunger for power, for security that never comes. Now gaze upon the marketplace of today. Walk through the shopping mall, the neon cathedral of consumerism. The air hums with artificial light and synthetic music, each store a shrine to desire. Man no longer bows to gods, but he bows to brands. He believes himself free because he chooses between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, between iPhone and Samsung. Yet, this is not freedom, it is the illusion of choice within the prison of consumption. The will commands, buy, discard, buy again, and man obeys, enslaved by his own cravings. Even in the realm of knowledge, the will distorts. Universities, once sanctuaries of thought, now resemble marketplaces, selling degrees as commodities. The student does not seek truth, but employment. The professor does not pursue wisdom, but recognition and grants. Knowledge is bent to the will's demand for profit, prestige, power. The hunger for truth is devoured by the hunger for career. And consider love in the modern world. Dating apps, endless swipes, profiles arranged like products. The will, once clothed in romance, now reveals its machinery openly. The species demands union, reproduction, continuation, and men and women are reduced to items in a catalog. Each thinks they choose freely, yet each is compelled by forces older than thought. And still, after the match, the cycle repeats. Passion fades, dissatisfaction grows, boredom returns. Divorce courts are filled, not because love was false, but because the will never rests. Here, then, is the record of human history. Rome's conquests, medieval faith, Renaissance art, industrial toil, modern consumption. Different centuries, different costumes, but one script. The will never sleeps, never surrenders, never changes. It builds empires only to destroy them, raises faiths only to corrupt them, inspires art only to commodify it, drives progress only to bind man in new chains. If the will governs all, is there any escape? Can man step aside from this torrent, or is he condemned to drown forever? Here lies the only faint glimmer in this bleak landscape, the possibility, rare and fragile, of liberation. Not through reform, not through progress, not through utopia. These are but new masks of the will, but through detachment, contemplation, and renunciation. The first step is independence of thought. To think for oneself is already to weaken the herd spell. Few dare this, for solitude terrifies. The crowd provides warmth, approval, the comfort of shared illusions. To step aside is to feel the cold wind of truth, to hear one's own thoughts without the echo of others. Yet only here can the chains loosen. The thinker who dares to question, who dares to strip away the varnish of public opinion, glimpses reality as it is, a world governed by blind striving. He gains nothing, but he ceases to be deceived. Art provides another momentary reprieve. In aesthetic contemplation, the will is silenced. When music floods the soul, when painting or poetry unveils essence rather than appearance, the individual no longer desires or strives, but simply perceives. For a brief instant, time dissolves. Individuality dissolves. The torment of striving falls silent. This silence is not happiness, it is peace, which is deeper. The greatest artists are not those who flatter the will with entertainment, but those who reveal its essence and, in revealing, momentarily suspend its tyranny. Compassion, too, is a fracture in the will's dominion. When one perceives another's suffering as one's own, the illusion of separateness fades. The boundary between self and other, erected by the will to perpetuate striving, begins to crumble. Compassion does not promise joy, but it lessens torment. In a world of universal suffering, to lessen even a fragment is to resist the will's cruelty. The saints, the truly compassionate, are those who live not for desire, but for the recognition that all life is bound by the same torment. Yet, the ultimate path is renunciation. The ascetic, who turns from desire, who denies ambition, who rejects even the intoxication of pleasure, approaches true liberation. He does not fight the will, he withdraws. He allows striving to wither by refusing to nourish it. His life is poverty, chastity, stillness not as virtue, but as negation. In him the will exhausts itself, and existence softens into quietude. This is not salvation, not immortality, not reward. It is simply the end of torment. The world mocks renunciation, for the world is nothing but the will in disguise. But those few who walk this path stand like silent peaks above the storm. They do not strive, they do not hunger, they do not cling. They live already in the shadow of death, and in that shadow they find peace. And so we return, after this long descent, to the only question that matters. What is life, if not a restless chain of desires that end in nothing? You are born without consent, thrown into a world already vibrating with hunger. You grow, you learn to long, to envy, to pursue shadows. You chase wealth, love, fame, wisdom, each shining like a distant star, and each dissolving the moment you reach for it. At last, weary, you collapse into death, which cares nothing for your striving, which remembers nothing of your dreams. The book of your life closes, and the world continues as if it had never been written. Does this not strike you as cruel, that you, with all your fears, all your sacrifices, all your sleepless nights, are but a passing flicker in a blind storm? That you suffer so deeply, yet your suffering has no witness, no purpose, no justification. The universe neither knows nor cares that you have wept. Your tears fall into an abyss that never answers. Some try to escape this thought by clinging to illusions. They tell themselves they will live on in memory, in children, in history. But memory fades, children forget, history buries all beneath its rubble. Rome was eternal, until it was dust. Napoleon believed himself immortal, yet his bones lie as still as any beggar's. The greatest names will one day be spoken for the last time, and silence will swallow them as it swallows all. And yet, despite all this, you cling to life. Why? Because the will commands it. Because even knowing life's futility, the body trembles at the thought of extinction. Even the philosopher, who has unveiled the horror, still eats, still breathes, still endures the farce. The will enslaves even its greatest critic. What, then, is freedom? Not the freedom of nations, which is only one master replacing another. Not the freedom of choice, which is only the freedom to obey the will in different costumes. True freedom is the cessation of striving, the negation of the will. It is the stillness that comes when desire no longer torments, when one no longer seeks, when one no longer clings. This freedom is not offered by the world. It is carved out of renunciation, solitude, compassion, and finally death. But perhaps you fear this silence. You imagine non-existence as a terror, a void, a loss. Yet, tell me, was it terrifying not to exist before you were born? Did you suffer in the endless centuries before your arrival? Non-being is not pain. Pain belongs only to the will, and the will belongs only to life. Beyond life, there is no striving, and therefore no torment. Death is not an enemy. It is the quiet friend who extinguishes the fire when the banquet of suffering has burned too long. Still, the world clings to illusions. The optimist insists that existence is a gift. The religious man insists that salvation awaits. The patriot insists that sacrifice has meaning. The lover insists that devotion redeems. All insist and all deceive. For beneath their words, the same truth resounds. Striving never ends, suffering never ceases, and all roads lead to the grave. And yet, within this bleakness, there lies a strange peace. To see clearly is to be freed from the intoxication of hope. Hope is the cruelest tormentor, always promising and never delivering. To live without hope is to live soberly, to see the world as it is, a restless sea where each wave rises only to crash. When illusion dies, one can at last stop running, stop grasping, stop lying to oneself. One can sit silently upon the shore, watching the waves break, knowing they are nothing but the will devouring itself. Do you not feel it now, that trembling recognition, that all you cling to is a shadow, that every ambition, every desire, every joy is but a brief trick of light before darkness returns? And do you not also feel, beneath the sorrow, a faint release? To know that nothing matters is also to know that nothing can bind you. The will may rage, but you need not serve it. You may stand apart, in solitude, in quiet contemplation, until at last death completes what renunciation begins. So I leave you with this final question. If all your striving ends in nothing, if every illusion betrays you, if even love itself is only the species' trick, why do you cling so desperately to life? Why not, instead, let go, and in letting go, find the only peace this world can grant? The silence that follows is the only true answer. It is the silence beyond desire, beyond striving, beyond the will itself. A silence deeper than joy, deeper than sorrow, the silence of nothingness, which alone is free.